What is international trade invoice? Buying and selling of goods and services across national borders is known as international trade. For international trade, we use different invoices. What are they? They are 1. Commercial invoice. 2. Detailed invoice. 3. Confirmed that the invoice. 4. The receipt of an invoice. 5. Manufacturer invoice. 6. Form of an invoice. 7. Pro forma invoice. 8. Sample invoice. 9. Consular invoice. 10. Consignment invoice and 11. Customs invoice. What are commercial invoice? Commercial invoice is also known as shipping invoice or trade invoice. It is provided by the seller to the buyer. This is commercial invoice. Next, what is detailed invoice? The detailed invoice will have contents like goods, specifications, quantity, unit price, price conditions, value. This is detailed invoice. This invoice will have E and OE words printed which states that we hereby certify that the contents of the invoice herein are true and correct. The receipt of invoice. This will have value, payment received under credit no. So and so issued by so and so bank. This invoice is of multi-use. Its purpose is to replace the commercial invoice, payment receipts, bills of exchange without having to reopen. Manufacturer invoice. Issued by manufacturers of export goods in domestic currency prices of the sales voucher. There should be foot which is we hereby certify that we are actual manufacturers of the goods invoiced. Payable to some exporters, the person in charge of manufacturing should sign and seal on the invoice. What is form of an invoice? Mainly used for reference when the buyer accepts the offer. The seller should be requested by the buyer before closing of the opening of an informal reference to the invoice, in which the price is only estimated price, and the final binding the transaction for both sides. Pro forma invoice. A pro forma invoice is a document that states a commitment on part of the seller to deliver the products or services as notified to the buyer for a specific price. Next is sample invoice. The sample invoice is just a small invoice. It is when the seller sends buyer a list for the purpose of issuing an import declaration. Consular invoice. A consular invoice is a document, often in triplicate, submitted to the consulate or embassy of a country to which goods are to be exported. It also indicates detail about the content of the shipments and affirms that it does not contain any illegal items. Consignment invoice. It is a consignment of goods, when the seller to the buyer, as the pricing basis of open invoices. Customs invoice. It is an invoice importing country's customs import declaration required by the authorities. It should be in specific format of invoice, mainly as a paid valuation to determine the country of origin, customs duty or impose differential treatment based on anti-dumping duties. Customs invoice specific format may vary in different countries.